Above and beyond borders.
Beyond borders.
It's Borderline
with Ireti Bakare-Yusuf.
Welcome back to Borderlines. Wasn't that an incredible conversation with Diana Buti? But it doesn't end there. I'm telling you, this is International Women's Month, and today has got to be one of my favorites. Okay, because the two women I have today, they are fearless women. They are fearless women of truth and advocacy. They are activists who just break barriers. Right, let me tell you her profile before I tell you what her name is. She's known for the first Jewish appointee to resign from the Biden administration over the war in Gaza. She was a special assistant to the chief of staff at the Interior Department after being named to the post by President Joe Biden in early 2023. However, in May 15th, she resigned in a 4-page letter that slammed Biden's, I quote, disastrous support for Israel's genocide in Gaza. Her name is Lily Greenberg Cole. Lily, welcome to Nigeria, albeit digitally.
Thank you for having me. I hope to one day come in person as well.
Absolutely. It's a crazy country. You belong. You absolutely belong. Welcome. So it's when everybody was shocked because, of course, yes, several other, a couple of other people had resigned back in 2023. But here you are, Jewish. And one of the things you said for your resignation was, the Biden administration, their support of the war in Gaza was literally putting Jewish lives at risk. Talk to us about that. Unpack that for us.
Yeah, I think I've been saying this so much just in regards to what's been happening in the U.S. right now, right, in the last few weeks with the arrests of students and people on student visas or students, graduate students, undergraduate students in the United States being arrested and deported supposedly, because they have spoken out about Palestine, and the justification that the White House is using is that this is to combat anti-Semitism. I don't see how shredding civil liberties in this country, and arresting people without due process and kidnapping them essentially from the street in broad daylight keeps Jews safe in the same way that killing hundreds of thousands of children doesn't make Jewish people safe. And I think, it's very clear. It's been very clear to me for a few years now, although it wasn't my whole life, that the status quo in Israel-Palestine of a system of oppression where some people have rights and some people don't is not a status quo that will keep Israeli Jews safe or American Jews or Jews anywhere, because if people are claiming to do these things, this violent repression in the name of Judaism, of course that's going to breed resentment towards Jews. And, what was so devastating when I was in the administration was to hear the president, not only, there were people in my community who were killed on October 7th. And if anything, any system, right, that relies on the oppression of one group of people is inherently harmful, I think, not just for the people being oppressed, but for the people doing said oppression. But I think October 7th within Israel even kind of blew up the idea that the status quo of the Israeli state keeps Israeli Jews safe. And so that was what my community was experiencing and reeling with and going through that. And then to see the president say things like, if there were not Israel, not a Jew in the world would be safe, and to not use any leverage possible that the United States has to hold the Israeli government accountable for committing war crimes in Gaza in retribution for October 7th. And also the Israeli government was doing basically nothing to try and return the hostages. If anything, bombing the densely populated area where they are seems really counterintuitive to, indiscriminately bombing this small strip. And then to see the person that I was working for, that I was supposed to be like representing his administration, his both the language and the policy of like, we are unconditionally supporting Israel in this moment, regardless of how many hospitals they bomb, and regardless of how many children they kill, and regardless of how many homes they blow up, because that is for the Jews. I mean, it just doesn't take a genius to think that, of course, that is going to create and add to anti-Semitism. Like that is going to make people resent. I mean, people are watching for, a year. We're going to push 2 years now in October, right? But people watching on their phones, like some of the most horrific images that you can imagine, and then being told that this is what has to happen to keep Jewish people safe. I mean, come on. Like it's so unfathomable and unrealistic. And my work was not centered around foreign policy necessarily, or what was happening in Palestine, but I could no longer represent that administration as a Jewish person and as someone who, has loved ones in Israel and in Palestine, and just as a human being who knew that this was like morally wrong.
Indeed. Thank you for that. Let's talk about Lily, the Jewish Lily who was brought up as a Jew. Before you even got into the Biden administration, what was those values that shaped you? Because I've had Jewish people that I've interviewed. I've had Jewish pro-Zionist and Jewish liberals like you who are anti-Zionist. And I've had to say to you, but the Jewish value that I knew growing up in England was about breaking bread, right? It was about inviting others in. But what we're seeing now is an exclusion, a pushback. Talk to us about that value. What you, and I'm quoting you now, I feel that I'm really living in my Jewishness. What is that?
Yeah. I love what you said, that breaking bread. It's, I think I was raised in I went to Jewish day school. I was very involved with synagogue. My parents, were very intentional. If anything, I think it's really beautiful and something that is a kind of, in a lot of ways, uniquely American experience. My dad is not Jewish, but he, Judaism goes through its matrilineal. Even patrilineal Jews are, I consider them Jews, and many other people do. But my parents made a very intentional choice that like they were going to raise my sister and I in a very Jewish home and in a really strong like Jewish community, and that was very important to my mom. Given that our family came to the United States because we were fleeing anti-Semitism in Europe, and I grew up and I loved being Jewish. I really resonated with very strong values of education, very strong like Jewish kind of text study, and when Jews do, I guess, our version of Bible study, it'd be like Torah text study, and it's very it's very centered in debate. It is Jewish law that exists now is like not really the Old Testament. It's a collection of what we call the Talmud and the Mishnah, like rabbis basically from the time of the temple being destroyed until now, arguing about what these rules even mean and then how to apply them to our daily life. And in a lot of ways, Judaism is a faith, but it's also very much like a framework for how to live and how to build a society. More than I think, that, and that's why it kind of crosses these like boundaries of like culture and ethnicity and faith. Like it's a little, it's in between all of them. And I loved that. And I really especially in, I think, American Jewishness, it's very rooted in justice work. And this knowledge that we are obligated to build a world that is better than the one that we have come into. And it's not about what happens after we die as much as what we do right now, and how we are to the people around us, and how we are to the stranger, and how we are to people who are more vulnerable than us. And I think some of it is Jews are a very small population, and so we have always known that like we thrive in places where civil liberties are strong, where dissent is allowed, where minorities are accepted. Like Jews do not thrive under authoritarianism or ethno-nationalism, despite what has happened in Israel. And so for me, like what I learned from being Jewish was to question authority. I mean, the word Israel means wrestle with God, right? It's the name that Jacob was given after he wrestled with an angel or some celestial being. And to me, like that is the root of what Jewishness has always felt like to me is not obeying blindly or like just trusting in a higher power or even like, tribalism or loyalism to your community. It is taking on fights because, you know that like something is not right. And that you know that like, as a, where there's it's not necessarily a commandment. It's like there's a word called pikuach nefesh, which means like you are obligated to break any commandment, including like the Sabbath or anything like that, if it means saving a life, right? Like saving lives is more important than anything else that's been, that we are obligated to do by the Torah or any of the Jewish laws or anything else. Like that is the highest and most important thing in Judaism. So then, as I got older and was like starting to question some of the very intense like Zionism and pro-Israel narrative that I was raised with, like the more you see what's happening to people, to Palestinians in Israel, the less Jewish it starts to feel, right? If you have that like rootedness in what I think it really means to be Jewish and what it means to be like a part of a community and of humanity, but yeah, I mean, I'm in some ways I'm really glad that I had that, like, I think being so rooted in my values of my tradition and like both of, of what sort of we've been taught, but then also because of what has happened to us is what allowed me to like have that clarity, like, oh, okay, I can actually recognize when something is not in alignment with that.
Indeed, absolutely. You mentioned something about ethno-nationalism. And Zionism, would you say Israel, because again, I do a lot of reading of this and also I haven't spoken to, Jewish friends way before all of this happened. One of the things they say to me is Israel is a state of mind, not an actual, not an actual land, that it's a spiritualism. That is the Jewish value. But then, we do have a state of Israel, which does exist. That's not to say it shouldn't exist, but we've got to ask, I want to ask you, how does that sort of conflict with Zionism, especially given the Jewish value, where you said, it's about inclusion, it's about life. You break every rule to save a life, not to suppress, a life, whereas Zionism is that ideology that's about exclusion of others.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the question that, people like in my community are grappling with so much. I think, it's kind of like what we can talk a lot about what Zionism has, like what the intention is or what we as Jews feel that it means or what it even maybe like started as. But I think what's most important right now is what is it and what has it become, and how has it impacted the people who have been hurt by it, which are Palestinians. And I mean, in a lot of ways too, I think like creating, I think a system of supremacy is bad for all of us, including Jewish people, who may be, even if it is a system of Jewish supremacy. I think it's like, for me, the concept of like Zionism as a religious idea and as like a connection to, this place where our like religion and culture was born out of thousands of years ago, has existed in Judaism since diaspora. And that's like something that I think we can recognize and can be important to us. And I have like what feels like a very religious and like spiritual connection to that place, right? But does that mean that I get to go live there at the expense of someone who has lived there for the last, 2000 years and and all of their grandparents are buried in a cemetery. And no, right? I mean, that to me, that's just like feels, my family, as far as we know, comes from Eastern Europe. And like, that is the last home that we had. And like, maybe thousands of years ago, those people immigrated there from Palestine, but I am not from there. And I think so with Zionism, like that is something I think our community really needs to challenge ourselves on, of like what we are in kind of a post-Zionist world, I think, in a lot of ways. Like, it's like you're saying, like the state of Israel exists. It is not a matter of like, should it or shouldn't anymore, or like, should make it, like it exists, and how it exists right now is unacceptable and untenable, and unjust. And I don't, I don't believe that a Jewish state has to be built on this framework of Jewish supremacy.
Indeed.
To me, again, that's like so out of line with Jewish values. But if we look at kind of like the historical context, in some ways, it makes sense that like, Zionism, really political Zionism of like the 1900s, 20th century, like was born out of the nationalism, like the movement of nationalism in Europe, and then kind of in other parts of the world where it was like, okay, people have states, and like, this is how we keep ourselves safe. And then of course, like the Holocaust happened. And I think the lesson that a lot of Jewish people took from that was that safety means, being able to, do what has been done to us unto others, like to have the power, to have military might, and to have like power in that way. And it's trauma, right? I mean, at the root of so much of this, like that, it is something that, kind of logically, I see how that happens. But at the end of the day, like, I think part of the reason that we're still where we are is that Israel doesn't make Jews safe, and it doesn't actually make Israelis safe. And so therefore, like, Israelis and Jewish people don't necessarily feel safe because we have not solved anti-Semitism, first of all. That is an endemic thing in society, like racism and other forms of bigotry. Like, it's going to be, it's hard. It's really hard to solve that. But also, like, real safety happens in like multiracial democracy. And when people are in when I know that a community that maybe is not mine has my back, and vice versa, right? And like, that's something that I've experienced in doing solidarity work with Palestinians, Palestinian and Jewish solidarity work. And like, that has, in a lot of ways, like, I feel like we throw around the words like healing all the time now, but like that work has like healed my own, both like personal and kind of, like what is in my bones and in my like family anti-Semitism trauma in a way that I don't think anything else ever could have. And I want people in my family and in my community to experience that, because I think it would like completely change everything.
Thank you. Now we have an America under Donald Trump, right? Yes.
Now we're fun here. Things are feeling really good.
I was just going to ask you, how is it feeling? Because when especially for people like you who, protested against one administration for their actions. Now we have a new administration, Donald Trump, who arguably, I don't know, I'll let you say which it is, could be perhaps more extreme, more permitting, more licensing, one who came in under the peace, I don't like war, but yet we're seeing more strikes. We're seeing more Palestinian lives, being erased, where Yemen, we've got Lebanon, Beirut again today. And it seems to be at this particular moment, we still don't have that ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia that he boasted we would have within days. We're 64, 65 days into Donald Trump. Talk to me about your new president.
God, it's 64. It feels like 3 years. Yeah, I mean, I think, honestly, I do think anyone who believed that he was a peace president was, I just think that's so obviously not true. I think, I do think there's a lot of people in this country, both, on kind of all sides of the political spectrum, who would like there to be less American money spent on war abroad. And And whether or not that's because they are anti-war, and some of them are, it's also because we don't have things in this country. It is very hard for people to live. You know, basic quality of life has deteriorated. People do not have health care. We do not have public education accessible to everyone. We do not have good infrastructure. And I just think, like, you know, our inequality in this country has skyrocketed, right? Because of billionaires and people like Elon Musk who hoard all of these resources for themselves. And then also because we have the largest military budget in the world. And I think it's like, again, there are people having a lot of reactions. Like, I feel like a lot of people were looking at what was happening in Gaza and saying, like, oh my God, that not only is this horrible, but like those are my tax dollars being spent on this. And that is really wrong. And also, I can't take my kid to the doctor or like get another pair of glasses, or, you know, I'm deciding like if I'm going to get new shoes for myself this year or for my kids. Come on, like, how do we have the money to bomb children and not pay for these basic things? So I think that was like, you know, Trump would kind of, I mean, of course, like, was speaking to, there's a lot of people I think who voted for him because they want him to be more non-intervention. But he is, I mean, Trump is an autocrat. He's an authoritarian. We've known this since 2017. He's someone who has emboldened and empowered white supremacy in this country, and neo-Nazis and Christian Zionists who I think are very, very scary, and also less like they're, you know, that Christian Zionism is an underpinning of like American support for Israel in a way that I think people don't quite know that much about. But the person who's been nominated to be ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, is would be the first non-Jewish ambassador to Israel from the U.S. ever. Is a evangelical Christian Zionist whose politics are rooted in the like theory of the rapture and the idea that all of the Jews need to be in Israel to trigger Armageddon and a massive war, which would lead to the eradication of the Palestinians and Muslims and pretty much any Arab. I mean, not to mention them, like, there's a lot of Palestinian Christians, so I don't know how they factor into this, but you know, and then that will trigger the second coming of Christ, and all of the Jews will either convert or die. So it's a very anti-Semitic, Islamophobic, racist politic that also like absolves any guilt for mass murder, right? Because it's part of some like heavenly plan. I mean, these people are trying to trigger what they think is the end of the world through war, through climate crisis, because they think that means that the second coming is back, and it would trigger the second coming. And again, like, it's you know, I specifically with these people, it is incredibly racist and white supremacist way of looking at the world, because of, again, it doesn't factor in, like, they're not, it's everyone who's not a white Christian basically is disposable. So those are the people in charge now, and it has felt very scary in the last few months being here. I think it's like specifically with Gaza and with Palestine and with what's happening to pro-Palestinian protesters and organizers here, like, the Biden administration, you know, set a lot of this up. And I think we need to be like that needs to be very clear and very honest. But of course, like, Trump and the people that he's aligned with, including the settler movement and like the extreme religious extremists in Israel who see allies in religious extremists in the United States, are just going to escalate it. They're specifically using the issue of Palestine in the United States to strip away people's rights, because they think that politicians and the public are going to look away. And they, you know, rightfully have seen that, you know, people, even including the Democratic Party, have not fought for these people, right? And have enabled like a crackdown on their free speech, on their rights. And I don't know if you saw, you know, how like when the White House, when Mahmoud Khalil, who was the first student to be arrested from Colombia, the White House tweeted a photo of his face and it said Shalom Mahmoud over it, like goodbye, which is like, I mean, it's really a disgusting attempt to like use our community as the face of this fascist crackdown. And, you know, using our community to attack Palestinians and the movement for Palestinian freedom. And like, not only is this not going to solve anti-Semitism, I think if anything, like it breeds resentment of Jews to take people's rights away in our name. But that is also what these people want. It is like classic scapegoating, because instead of people being mad at them, they're going to be mad at Jews.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting something you said just now, and as I was listening to you, and it literally set off alarm bells in my head. All Jews to Israel, which is another. It reminds me of the European aggression towards Jews in the 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century.
Yeah,
and
it's. I mean, right. It's instead of working towards a multiracial democracy society, you know, that is like a place where people of many different faiths and races can live together, like it's ethno-nationalism, right? It's this is how we deal with this group of people.
And what if the Jews that don't want to go? What if Jews who are happy? Why should they go to Israel? And this American, you know, sort of Trumpist foreign policy where he has, you know, he has people working for him who believe, or they believe in the dictum of all Jews should go to Israel for the second coming. What happens to the lilies of this world?
It's not about, we are just pawns in this, like, you know, it's not about real Jewish safety. It's not about real, you know, Jewish like agency. It's not about like seeing us as full people. And I mean, it doesn't matter what we want. We play this very important role, which I think is like, that's where it gets, you know, these people like kind of, they want to like, they act like they want to like protect us and keep us safe, and like, because they don't want anything to happen to us until, you know, but it's not, it's like there's you know, people say like philo-Semitism, which is like the opposite of anti-Semitism, is in this case is just as bad, because it's like a again, it's dehumanizing.
Like a pigeonhole. It's like a pigeonhole.
Yeah. It's about like, how do we fit in this like game of theirs, which, you know, of course, like the fact that, again, like using us to justify like mass murder of another people is insane. I mean, it just is like, it's completely morally defunct, and really scary. And I feel that, like there's a lot of alarm bells going off right now.
Indeed, I can imagine.
But
I can imagine. What's, you know, I'm presuming you probably have friends in American universities. What's, you know, Columbia? I think I have something that I'd like to play for you now before you respond. Please. Let me just play it for you.
Listen to this. If you have a social media page, make sure it is not filled with commentary on the Middle East. And when a Palestinian student objected, the dean of the journalism school, a man called Jelani Cobb, stood up and said to the entire student body, "Nobody can protect you. These are dangerous times." That's journalism students at Columbia University in the United States being told to avoid posting, publishing, writing anything that might upset the current administration in the United States of America, and being told by their own dean, the dean of their school, "Nobody can protect you. These are dangerous times."
I mean, I heard about insane. I think it's very interesting that this isn't the first example of something that someone from outside the United States has reported or shown me. I'm sure it is intentional that like something like this is not being reported across the country. And I think that's very, very, very scary. But I mean, the university's not universities like capitulating to this administration. I think it's incredibly shameful.
Do they have a choice though? Because funds are being withdrawn. Yes, you have the really big ones who have huge foundations, but honestly, do they have a choice?
I mean, I think that's kind of the question that like a lot of us are asking ourselves right now of facing authoritarianism. It's like I think we have to decide that we have a choice, like that we are gonna, there's a really famous image that is being circulated a lot in this country now of like, it's just like a graphic, but it's a big fish chasing a bunch of little fish. And then it's like, don't panic, organize, because all the little fish form together in the next slide, and they make a fish that is bigger than the big fish, right? I mean, there are more of us than them. And one of, I think, the scariest parts of this kind of time is the obeying in advance that is happening, right? Is the like, well, school, hospitals, universities, right? They don't want their funding pulled. They don't want to like lose their connection and ties to government, and so they're obeying in advance. But if you as a university cannot protect your students, I don't really know what the point of you is. I mean, we have to make a decision that we're going to, especially people with more power and privilege, like university administrators, have to protect people who are more vulnerable. And I mean, especially it is so ridiculous that the administration would like crack down on dissidents and dismantle the education system in this country in the name of protecting American Jews, when education and freedom of expression are like cornerstone Jewish values. Indeed. And how are you helping Jews by eliminating educational opportunities at institutions with thousands of Jewish students? I think Columbia has one of the highest percentages of Jewish students in the country. Yeah. And like taking away people's jobs and livelihoods and claiming to do it on behalf of Jews is going to fuel anti-Semitism, right? We're seeing, it's McCarthyism, and they're using like this very anti-Semitic law that was passed in the 50s to target Jewish immigrants who were from Eastern Europe who were suspected of being socialists. That is the law that they're using to target Mahmoud Khalil and these other students. So it's just like a replication of history. And I feel, to hear that, I mean, that's very, very scary to hear the dean say that. But I don't know. It's like I don't know exactly what. I think something that I've been thinking about a lot is like, especially, I think within the Jewish community and like people who have experienced authoritarianism before, like you have higher pattern recognition, right, for this kind of thing. And everything we're seeing happening, including like the scapegoating of Jews to justify violence, is something we have seen before. And I think it is like our duty, again, not just as American Jews, but as everyone here, to like recognize that pattern and do everything we can to change the outcome. Yeah. Like it's easy to feel like this is just happening, without, and that's what they want us to feel. They want us to feel incredibly disempowered. But
yeah, let me just ask, as you were talking, something occurred to me, and it may be wrong, it may be right. You're American, so all American, if I say. Could it be that there's an intention by the Trump administration to distract the country away from, direct, things like inflation, the cost of eggs, like you said, public education, healthcare, those things that directly affect the ordinary citizens. The threat of an extreme Elon Musk. So divert the citizens' attention from that by actually focusing on basically bullying and intimidating young minds, young people, intelligent minds and interrogative minds that are well read.
Yeah, I think 100%. And also a distraction from, again, like making people think that students on campus protesting genocide, a lot of them of their own people, is more of a threat to American Jews than literal white supremacist Nazis marching in the street is intentional, right? Like, if we want to talk about anti-Semitism in America, then we need to be talking about the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting and the Charlottesville Unite the Right rally, and the Nazi salutes that Elon Musk and Steve Bannon did. Those are severe threats. Students asking their universities to divest from weapons producing is not the same.
Yeah.
And it is, I think you were right. It is intentional distraction.
Indeed. I'm glad you mentioned Nazism, or at least the Nazi salute. I did have a question for you about J.D. Vance, who appears to be the poster child of a growing far-right extremism in the U.S. How threatened do you feel as an American with somebody like that in power as the vice president of your country?
Very, very threatened. It's very scary. These people have a vision of, their vision of this country feels like completely out of alignment with everything I believe is necessary for people to live thriving, peaceful lives. And it is a vision where white men, Christian men, have, dominion and power over others, and no accountability. It's a direct response to, in a lot of ways, like what I think has happened in the last 100 years or so in this country of trying to, to change that status quo. That has been the status quo in the United States since its founding, of course. But there has been attempts to change that.
Indeed.
And this is the reaction to that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I've got to ask you, what did your community, your parents, what were their response when you resigned? And indeed, for your stance now, what do they say to you? How do they feel?
Yeah, I think for so many reasons, your kid quitting their job on TV for their job for the president is not ideal. I think
I can feel that.
Yeah, it's not awesome. And also especially, and this is something I wrote about in my resignation letter and talked about a lot of my grandparents didn't go to college. I don't think my grandma went to high school. I'm not sure if my grandpa finished high school, honestly, because he had to work. And 2 generations later, I was working for the president of the United States. That's
powerful.
It's powerful. And the weight of that was something that I grappled with a lot, and something that made it, hard to, I knew that I felt like I had to resign much earlier than I actually did, but I had to, move through what it meant for me and for my community and my family. And I think, American Jews have been managed to be very safe and very successful in this country in a way that has not been the case for us in a lot of other places. that Jewish people have lived. But I think, again, it still feels like tenuous because it is so short in some ways, right? I mean, the town the town over from where my Jewish day school was growing up in California, up until I think the 1980s, Jewish people could not buy property there. We're not allowed to live in the town of La Jolla, California. You could not have a deed to a home if you were Jewish, and that's not that long ago.
Wow. Indeed.
Yeah,
Indeed.
It's not.
In the UK, there was no Irish, no Jews, no dogs, no black.
Right. I mean, and the United States as well. Most of these elite universities we're talking about had quotas on the amount of Jews that were allowed, if they were even allowed in, up until like the 50s after the Holocaust and the 60s. And so, like, I understand why people in my community, despite having this access and power and really, like, accessibility to whiteness in a lot of ways that we have gained in the United States, being like functionally white people here, is it feels tenuous. And so, yeah, I think the community I grew up in is very, very, very pro-Israel. So over the last like 3 years that I have gotten involved in anti-occupation, anti-apartheid, Palestinian solidarity work, like specifically with Jews. I've been very involved with like Jewish groups who do this, who are both trying to change like the dialogue within the Jewish community, but also like, this stuff is happening in our name. And so I think it's very like important and powerful when we speak up against it, and to kind of like rip away, to not allow, we kind of, it's like we take out the like one of the stones that like builds up the foundation of all of this. If we're just like, no, actually this like has nothing to do with Jews and you can't do this in our name. But yeah, I think I have unfortunately like lost a lot of people from my community and from my family and from my, sort of family friends. And like, I grew up in a community that was like American Jews, but also a lot of Israelis and a lot of people whose parents had come to the States from Latin America who were Jewish, and from Iran, and like a very diverse and interesting Jewish community in that way. And very much have, like kind of culturally grew up with American and Israeli Jewish culture combined. And so it has been a big loss and a big like transition. And I think it's been sad too, just to see, even outside of like people that I know personally, like the way within the kind of organized Jewish community, there is like an instinct to attack someone like me or like see me as a traitor. And I think not only is it really, really sad and wrong, but it is also like, again, Columbia University like capitulated with the Trump administration with all this stuff and still got their funding pulled, right? I think like Jews and synagogues and Jewish organizations can, spend a year basically like denigrating students on campus, and we are still going to be the target of these right-wing authoritarians.
Indeed.
That's what we have to like get through our heads. Like this will not keep us safe, by like throwing Palestinians under the bus.
Thank you. Right, let me open up the lines. I'll forewarn you now, Lily. My listeners are co-hosts. I have to calm them down. They had been calling all throughout. I have to calm them down. So I'll give you a minute to answer, but you might need a pen. Just write down the questions. We might have to group questions together because the lines have already started ringing. 0201 277 0993, 0201 465 7190. Telephone number, WhatsApp number is 0809 597 5805. I'm coming to your calls now. Make it sharp, short, and succinct. Hello.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening, Titilope. Yes.
Number one, I want to ask whether our former principal, Joe Biden, was responsible for the loss of the election.
Okay. Your dog is louder than you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, your dog is louder than you, but we're trying.
Don't mind that, and that's one. Number two, look at the WhatsApp scandal. The WhatsApp scandal that happened about 2-3 days ago.
Yes.
There you have remarks like made by J.D. Vance and Mr. Rubin and Co.
Yes.
Talking to Europe as low preload and what have you.
Yes.
Does she think that we have more terrible people in the cabinet, even than Trump himself? Because I don't understand. Like
Okay,
she said,
I got it.
Is he likely to be? Hello.
I'm listening. Wrap up.
Is he likely to be the successor? Are we likely to have a J.D. Vance or Elon Musk succeed Donald Trump?
Excellent.
With kind of this extreme tendency.
Thank you. Right, okay. So that's Titilokwe. He's a regular listener and a regular co-host. He said two, but he had 3 questions. Right. Do you foresee a J.D. Vance becoming the next president? What are your thoughts on the the Signal scandal? Let's call it Signal Gate. Yeah. And, the expose that's come out of the risk to the American populace. And as usually with Titilokwe, I've forgotten the 3rd one. But I'll give you a minute to answer. Oh, hold on. They're calling again. 1 second. Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening, Emmanuel.
Yeah, you have man on the line speaking to you.
One question. You and Titilokwe.
Two, please.
2 questions.
Number 1, does he have friends in the military? And does she get any feelers from them? Okay,
so the American military, right?
Yes.
Okay,
all
right.
Yes. That
okay.
has to do with maybe they are not in consent. With what Trump, they are not.
I got it.
Yes, to what Trump is doing. Then number 2, does he think Trump really cares that much about the growth of America or about domination, of the world?
Good question. Thank you. Right, so you've got 4 questions there. I can only give you 2 minutes because the lines are still going. So do you have any friends in the military? And what kind of feedback do you get from them? Do they agree with what's going on? Are they excited, or do they feel, do they have any objections to what we're seeing with regards to U.S. foreign military policy? And I think the second one is, do you think Donald Trump truly cares about Americans, or does he care more about world domination? Over to you, Lily. You have 2 minutes starting now for all those 4 questions together.
I know. I wish I had like a national security expert here. For JD Vance, I have no idea.
Okay, is he worse than Trump?
Yeah. I think they're all the same. I don't know that any of them are worse than the other. I think Trump would like to probably stay in power longer than he is technically allowed to.
Okay.
And I think honestly, like the more, in some ways, I'm less interested in thinking like, is JD going to be president? Then how can we build enough power to like, who do we actually want to be president, right? And like, how can we make sure that person, becomes president next? And actually, I don't know. I'm not interested in like,
okay,
I don't want to give that man any more time.
Okay.
The Signal scandal, I think, is insane. It's completely like, again, it just shows that there's different rules for different people, right? I think if any other person in the American intelligence operation like did that, on a lower sort of higher person on the hierarchy, they would be in massive trouble. They would have their clearance revoked. All of those people should have their clearance revoked. But I also think the fact that the focus has been in the media, it's the way they did this is so awful, instead of the fact that they are bombing civilian buildings. And that is not the problem. One of the messages is like, we just saw him go into his girlfriend's building, whoever their target was, and now the whole building is gone. That is like a whole building of people, of people in apartments, the fact, what they are talking about on Signal should be more of the scandal than the fact that they were doing it on Signal and had this journalist in there. Because we should not be leveling apartment buildings full of civilians.
And then the military.
Yeah,
do you have friends in the military, and what kind of? What are you hearing from them?
I have some, and I also know, there were people who also left the military either under Biden or leaving now, who are really concerned. I think like a lot of the people that I know in the American national security apparatus, like, are people who, most of the people who have worked in the American government, all these civil servants who are being fired, like, they're not in this because they want power. They're not in politics. They're like people who believe in civil service and that they are serving their country. Again, people can debate what the value of that is, but like I think a lot of people are very, very worried to see the way our institutions are being demolished. And I don't think Trump cares about Americans. I don't think he cares about, these people do not care about regular American people. They care about power and money.
Okay. All right. You can call now. I've got just 1 extra minute. Okay. I knew it. Hello.
Hello?
Yes. Good afternoon. Turn your radio off, please.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Go ahead.
This is Dadamoku from Surulere.
Yes. Go ahead.
My question is, how possible is this theology or theory of the second coming of Christ, and the Americans are trying to make it possible that by the time Christ come back a second time, all the Jews will have been converted to Christianity.
But I think, Pastor, I think you're taking us back to something that Lily's already addressed. Lily, the question is, thank you so much, Pastor. How possible, how much, or how possible, I guess is the word, do you believe in this second coming of Christ and that the Jews would have been converted before Christ returns? I think you addressed that earlier, but you might want to add an extra minute.
I mean, personally, I as a Jewish person, this is not like what I believe. But I think regardless of what people believe, what I have learned about Christianity and Islam is, it feels very out of line with those values of what I think it means to be a Christian, what my impression of that is, to like facilitate and support mass murder. So I think if your theory, if your theology leads you to a politics that supports mass murder, then maybe we need to change that theology.
We need to change that.
I don't think that theology is very in line with what Jesus said or did.
Indeed. You can call now. I can pick up one more call. Otherwise, I do have a final question for Lily. Oh, it's been wonderful having you. But before you go, I have to ask this question. When you look ahead, given the work that you do, the solidarity, it's a peace movement, etc., etc., what do you hope for in a Palestine and an Israel countries? What is your hope? I can't answer your call anymore. Calm down. Lily, you have a minute to respond to that, and I'll see if I can answer that call.
I mean, I want a peaceful, thriving future for anyone who lives there.
What does the peace look like? What does that peace shape like for you?
I mean, in some ways, I think what people who live there want is more important, right, than what I necessarily want. But I think, the same thing I think we need in this country, a like democratic state, one vote, one person, right? I mean, where everybody has equal rights and access to the same resources, and where no one's religion or ethnicity or race gives them supremacy over anyone else.
Thank you. Right, let me answer this. Hello.
My first question was Joe Biden responsible for the loss of the Democratic Party at the election.
Sorry, say that again.
Thank you.
I did not hear a word. He was trying to fit it in. Titilope was trying to fit it in, and all I heard was Joe Biden. Hold on. The line is going again. Hello.
Yeah, hello, good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah, sorry, my name is Shay. So I just have one question for your guest.
Quickly, go ahead.
Yeah. So I just wanted to ask, why didn't Biden do something about this before Trump came in?
Okay.
That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, that will be the last question. So over to you. You have what, 30 seconds or so?
I'm assuming he means
why did Joe Biden not put a stop to this and fix this issue before Donald Trump came in?
I honestly, I don't know. I think it's probably the same reasons why he didn't do it while he was in power. He was a coward and was not willing to stand up to Bibi Netanyahu and the Israeli government.
Lily, All I can do is wish you the very best. I wish you to be safe, even more so, because I know the kind of threat some people like you actually are under. But I wish you joy, I wish you happiness, and I wish you laughter. Thank you for speaking to us, for joining us in Nigeria. Have a fabulous weekend.
Take care as well.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Fully enjoy your little one's big moments of growth.
To the man hustling every
99.3 Nigeria Info. We are more than just radio. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Nigeria Info FM. Check us out on Facebook at Nigeria Info 99.3. Follow us on Twitter at Nigeria Info FM and on Instagram at Nigeria Info FM Lagos for live updates as it happens. 99.3 Nigeria Info. Let's talk.